Hello, everyone. Welcome to Not Your Average Goat. This is a show that celebrates all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, while creating a space for authentic and vulnerable conversations that hopefully you find to be meaningful and relatable. Through these conversations, my guests and I hope to have an impact on dismantling deeply ingrained stigma and prejudice. Can you talk to me about kind of like the 10 years that you had your 4 children? What did you observe about your mental health, your depression, your anxiety? How did all of that change and intensify over the years?
Oh, I have basically suffered from postpartum depression since I had my first child, and I didn't realize that that was a possibility. So, me being a person that already suffered from anxiety and depression, to then get pregnant and then end up with postpartum, it was a total shift for me because it was like, okay, I have this child to take care of, so I can't just be stuck in how I'm feeling and what I can't shut down. There's a human being relying on me. So through the 10 years, it's been fun trying to navigate exactly that. There's another human being, like, and this human being can't take care of themselves, and they can't fend for themselves, and they can't feed themselves, and they can't change themselves. So it was like I was saying earlier, their feelings and their emotions and their wants and their needs has come before my own, because that's what I have to do. Because if I don't, then what happens? And the what happens was always, I don't want to find out, because little babies are little babies. So I went from being, I'm capable of thinking about myself and worrying about myself and what I'm going through and how I'm feeling, to, oh, nope, it's mom mode. And it stays mom mode because that's how it's got to be for the rest of their lives, because I'm a mom and they got to come first. So as each child has come along, it's been me diving in more to being about my kids than being about myself. And then I didn't realize that postpartum depression actually can last for 3 years. And when I heard that statistic, I was like, oh, that explains life. Because from the time that I had my first son to the time that I had my second son, I was just supposed to start coming off of having postpartum, and then I got pregnant again. And then there's a gap between my son and my first daughter, but it was just right outside the window of, hey, guess what? You no longer have postpartum. Now you're pregnant again. So I've kind of just suffered from postpartum the whole way through, and navigating that was children. They rely on you and you have to take care of them, and they will always come first.
So I know that you didn't find out about the postpartum depression, the statistic, I think, until you were pregnant with your last child.
Yeah.
Looking back on the 10 years from when you had your first son to your last daughter, are there any kind of big experiences that stand out to you that were a result of your postpartum? Like any dark times that you remember that you really had to work to kind of pull yourself out of?
I hate to say it, but all of it was kind of dark because
Yeah.
postpartum just is. And a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people don't realize that the moms have no clue what is going on inside of themselves. But it got to its worst when I had my last one, and I became horrifically suicidal. And I was to the point of, I was basically at war with myself inside of my head. I would wake up every day and my brain was telling me I wanted to kill myself. And I was literally saying to my brain, but no, I don't. And it was going, but yes, you do. So every waking moment of my day was this consistent battle of thoughts inside my head, and I didn't know how to navigate it because to me, I had completely and utterly lost my rocker because I'm like, why would my own brain tell me to kill myself? And I didn't realize that, like, I had heard stories about postpartum being bad and how bad they could get, but when it became my reality, that's when I became really aware of how bad postpartum can actually get.
If you feel like there's like if your brain's like almost like its own entity and you're kind of having this argument with yourself, I could definitely see how it could make you feel like, hey, like what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling like this? Am I crazy? You know,
Oh,
what
I I told Michael every day, I'm like, I've lost my mind. I've completely and utterly lost my mind. And trying to explain to him what was going on, he couldn't just do nothing but sit there and look at me with like the strange look because I'm like, let me find the words where you can understand, but I don't know what the proper words are so that you're not looking at me like I've lost my mind. And I always thought of postpartum, it's the, the mom doesn't care to care for the baby, and the mom doesn't care to listen to the baby cry, and the mom's struggling with having to take care of the baby. I never realized that postpartum could be exactly the opposite. When I was taking care of my child, it was what was making me happy. When I was taking care of my child, it was giving me the purpose of my days. It was the thing that was triggering me to fight the thoughts that were trying to make me kill myself.
I think that's definitely a really great point because I think there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about what postpartum is. And oftentimes people, like you mentioned, think about the mother like despising or hating the baby. And
Hmm.
you hear really, 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 really traumatic stories about sometimes parents, taking their own babies' lives, which I don't even really want to think about. But yeah, I think that's a really big thing to highlight is that that's not necessarily what postpartum is, and it can look very different for different moms. The pandemic also starts around the same time. Do you remember that having any specific impact on you personally?
Yes, because for the sake of being safe, I wouldn't leave the house because I was actually just had her before COVID really took off. So the only time I would leave the house was if I was going to a doctor's appointment or she had to go to a doctor's appointment. And even that was a struggle because I couldn't carry her around in her car seat because I had a C-section. So when her first couple of doctor's appointments came around, only one parent was allowed. So Michael had to take her because I physically couldn't. So I was stuck at home and wasn't going nowhere because I was still trying to heal from the C-section, knew my system was compromised, and I didn't want to take on the chance of getting her sick by going out and getting myself sick because at that point in time, who else is taking care of her because Michael had to work. So I was stuck, and I mean, actually stuck with dealing with myself every single day inside my own home and not being able to go out and socialize and be around people and have people over to come see her or to help. It was me taking care of all four kids while Michael was at work because he was thankfully still working when COVID first started. And so it was dealing with all of it all at once.
On top of this, too, when the pandemic started, it was really, really hard for anyone to connect with like a therapist, get prescriptions. And so I believe you were kind of dealing with all of this, trying to self-manage without anyone or any kind of supplemental
Oh,
medication,
yeah.
right?
I still to this day have not seen a therapist. That's partially because of me, but I had to meet with somebody to find out who they would place me with as a therapist. because they were that backed up. I had her in February. It wasn't that October. It was the next October that I'd finally gotten a call about being able to get into a therapist, because every single last place around was booked solid and they had no openings. They were like, we'll call you when we finally might have one.
I think we're finally out of the pandemic, but it was a really, really tough time for a lot of people. And especially for you, because you had already grown up with depression and anxiety, and then you have the postpartum on top of that, and then the pandemic hits, and I just can't even imagine what that felt like. But I'm so glad that you are where you are today, because I could see how that would just that that intensifying over time, if you had to continue living like that. I'm sure that you'd be in a very different place today. Um,
Oh, I'm sure I
yeah.
would be in a totally different place today.
But in 2021 kind of is when your health journey to recovery starts. Can you take me back to then, and like what did that feel like for you to kind of start that journey, and what were some of the first steps that you took?
I started my journey because my friend Kat, she was talking about her health journey and how she had suffered from postpartum with having her first daughter and trying to navigate that. And I was highly relating to it because I was still pregnant at the time and I knew that I was going to suffer from the postpartum because it was inevitable. So I started talking to her about it, and I'd come to find out that she was a coach, and she was like, take care of yourself right now, worry about yourself, worry about having the baby. Then we'll talk about what your journey could look like. And I was like, okay, I can handle that. I only got a couple months left. I'm like, but we're definitely having this conversation after the fact. So I ended up contacting her. I was 2 months out from having my youngest, and I was like, all right, I want to try to get under this before it gets horrifically bad, because I was highly unaware of how horrifically bad it was going to get. I talked with her, and she coaches a program that I now coach, and it's not just about the weight on the scale. It's about all aspects of life and being healthy in every area of your life. And I was like, I'm definitely going to need this. My weight's going to go back up because I'm going to be sitting and not able to do anything because I'm having a C-section. I'm like, my depression's going to make my weight go back up. I'm like, having anxiety is going to make my weight go back up. And at one point in time, I was up over 300 pounds. And I was like, I don't want to get there again, because that just makes the depression and the anxiety that much worse. So we talked about it, and I decided to join program with her. And I was highly unaware of how beneficial joining program was going to be for me, because I didn't realize that it truly was going to impact every area of my life. Yeah, I was seeing the weight come off, but as I was taking on every day, it wasn't about the worrying about my weight. It was, I have the mental capacity to figure out how to navigate what is going on in my mental health. And I have this person that is checking in with me each week to see how I'm doing. And it wasn't just about my weight, it was about, how are you doing mentally? How are you coping with dealing with the baby? And are you okay? And, like, what areas do you need to work on and how can you improve on that? And basically being there as a friend, as a coach, and as a confidant, because I knew she understood what I was going through with the postpartum. So having this come into my life ultimately helped save my life, because every week I knew I was going to have a phone call with her. and I could be honest with her and tell her what was going on and tell her how I was feeling and tell her what I was going through. And I wasn't going to be looked at a type of way or have the stigma around, oh, well, I can't tell her how bad my depression is right now, or I can't tell her that I'm fighting not to shove 20 million cookies in my face to deal with my anxiety. I can be like, I want to do this, and this is the steps that I'm taking to not do it. And being depressed, I know that if I get up and I get moving, it'll help my blood flow and it'll help my brain start to function in a different way where I start seeing things differently. And it was like this huge relief because I never had that kind of a mental shift to be okay with having that kind of conversation with somebody without feeling like they were going to look at me like I had six heads.
I know you said that you have yet to talk to a therapist, but I feel like your coach was your therapist. They might have the title of coach, but I feel like that's what she was for you in a way.
She definitely was because, like I said, I knew that she understood because she was ballsy enough to be talking about the things that I was feeling. And she was doing it for the sake of being like, hey, you're not alone. And I'm like, you don't realize how much you're truthfully telling me I'm not alone because I'm looking at it going, oh, that's how you felt today? That's how I felt 5 minutes ago. So I'm like, I know she can relate and understands. And that's one of the huge thing is having somebody there that is willing to take the moment to understand, because a lot of people don't get that. And when you suffer from postpartum, feeling like nobody else understands is one of the hardest parts because it's like you're not a woman, why would you get it? Or you haven't had a baby, so like, do you really know how bad the hormones get after the fact? Or it's like, oh, you had six kids and you didn't suffer from postpartum, so are you gonna understand? And it becomes one of those things where you don't want to open up about it because you feel like nobody else understands. And I knew for a fact she understood. So I could say the things to her as if she was basically like a therapist because I knew she would understand.
The relatability and feeling like you are being seen and being heard because you know that that person has had a similar experience to you and can understand where you're coming from. It's so important. And I think especially for postpartum because it's not talked about enough because there's still so much stigma and shame wrapped around it. And so um I think that's why I think it's so important for and why I'm so appreciative for you to come on the show and talk about your experience because you potentially could be helping other people who don't feel comfortable talking about their experience, but they hear about yours and they feel seen and they feel heard.
Oh, and I'm beyond happy to be able to talk about mine. And I try to make sure I let other people know that they're not alone either. Because if it wouldn't have been for my coach and me feeling like I wasn't alone, I would have never had the gumption to open up about my story or talk about my story because of the stigma. And, like saying the word suicidal is like something that is so off-putting to so many people because they're like, oh, nope, you're touching something that's horrifically taboo. We can't have that conversation. And I'm like, but why can't we have that conversation? Why can't it be an open conversation about the fact that there are many people all over the world that have suicidal thoughts and they don't know how to navigate it and they don't know how to deal with it and they're ashamed of it because they feel like it is so taboo that that's automatically got to be their response is being ashamed of it. And if they were to realize how many other people have had suicidal thoughts in their lives and didn't know how to navigate it either, they wouldn't be ashamed to talk about it because so many people can relate, even though they're not open about it. And I came to realize that by me, not even just the postpartum part, but the suicidal part of it, me opening up about being suicidal and navigating being suicidal, I've come to connect with people that are men that have been suicidal, and they're like, I'm beyond thankful that you opened up about that because it makes me feel less bad about myself and the thoughts that I've had and the experiences that I've gone through. And then they want to start sharing their story so that they can touch somebody else's life. And I'm like, if we would all just realize that you don't have to be ashamed of it because you could be saving somebody else, we could help so many people.
And I think, not to minimize the experience that women have or that you've personally have with postpartum, but I think society has put this extra burden and taboo gate when it comes to men because they're supposed to not have any feelings at all. They're not supposed to ever talk about them. Like all these different stereotypes and just gender roles that people are supposed to live in and stay in and be boxed in by. I think that, especially for men who have been raised that way, it can be especially difficult for them.
Oh, definitely. Michael and I have these kind of conversations all the time because men typically are told that you're not supposed to feel your feelings. And I'm like, that to me is the stupidest thing in the world
Yeah.
because you can be a strong man and still feel how you feel, because that's the thing is, regardless, you're human and every human feels. So it doesn't matter how much of a tough persona you're supposed to put on because you're a man. Feelings are feelings and everybody has them regardless of if they like it or not. And that's, I'm like,
Exactly.
you can have your feelings, you can express your feelings, and I'm not going to look at you a type of way just because you're a man. Like, you stub your toe and you want to scream, scream, because I'm sorry, when I stub my toe, I want to scream. So why would I look at you a type of way for the same thing?
Shockingly, at least to me, it feels shocking. Very soon into your own healing journey, you decide to become a coach yourself.
Yes.
What motivated you to do this?
One, it was holding myself accountable to all the things that I said that I was going to do. And I knew that if I became a coach and started sharing my story, it was doing exactly that. But I also knew that by sharing my story, I could impact other people's lives, whether it be through a mental health shift, through their health period as a whole, whether it be through weight loss. I knew that I could touch people's lives. And that was something that meant a lot to me because, like I said, ultimately, look, I'm trying not to cry.
Oh,
If it wasn't for my coach, I really have no clue what life would look like for me. And she was my glimmer of hope. And that's my thing is, if I can be that glimmer of hope for somebody else, then why not be that glimmer of hope? Why not shine that light and say, hey, there's a way through and you can get there. And if I could do it, then I know you can too. And you don't have to do it alone. And that's the thing is, you don't have to do it alone. And a lot of people look at it that way. I can't do it because I have to do it alone because I don't have the support system and I don't have the people. And I'm here to be that person for people, to be that support, to be that encouragement, to be that rock and that solid foundation, to say, hey, we're going to do it together. And that I know gives hope. And that's, I'm like, how could I not? If somebody else is willing to do it for me, how can I not do it for somebody else?
that's so true. I love that. I love that for you and that you had the strengths to be able to step into that type of role so soon into your own journey and all the people that you've likely been able to impact. I'm so that sure they're so grateful for you. This it's just really incredible to me to think about that. And I love how sincere and thoughtful. And again, it's the empathy coming out
Yeah.
again and showing itself through.
Like I said, I have a tendency to think about other people and how they would feel before myself. Granted, I've also learned that sometimes I got to put myself first to be able to help others. But the probability of being able, even if it's one person, if I can touch one person's life in my lifetime, then I'm okay with it being just one person because I know I've changed that life and I've made that person look at life differently and know that there's a way through, regardless of how horribly hard things may get. And that's what makes me want to get up every day and do the things, even when it's my worst day, is because I'm thinking about the other person.
Are there any people's stories or journeys that really stand out to you that you've been able to work with over the last 2 years that you've been a coach yourself?
Becoming a coach and diving into our community, I've got to meet some really amazing people. Um, I've met women that suffered from PCOS and thought that they would never have kids, and now they have multiple kids. And that's not a direct result of them being on program. It's just, like as they changed their lifestyle and went about navigating things, they then found a way to be able to get pregnant. And that's something that is like hugely impactful to know that like somebody that was told that they weren't going to be able to have kids now has kids. I know there have been other people that have been horrifically suicidal, and through changing their mindset and having the support system, they have also found a way through. Um, my own husband, he's working on his own mental health. Like, there's just so many people that have gone through so much and have done so much by changing the way they look at life and having the support of the people to help them navigate through their journeys. It All of it is truthfully inspiring and touching, and there isn't any one that stands out more than the other because they're all different and unique in their own ways. And thinking about these people makes me want to cry because it's like, what excuse do I have to not do if you went through that?
Hi, my wonderful goat friends. Firstly, thank you so much for your support and listening. If you're enjoying this conversation and other episodes of the podcast, I'd like to ask you to please give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you are listening on right now. And if you're so inclined, we love to hear your feedback in a full review. Also, might be a great idea to hit subscribe on that platform you're listening to right now so you can get notified of new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much again for being one of our loyal GOAT listeners. So one of the big things that you dealt with was the postpartum and trying to navigate how to be a mom and also be your own person. Do you have any tips or like tricks that you've been able to acquire over the years that have helped you put yourself first at times while also feeling like you're still a loving and caring mom? Like, do you have like any habits or anything that you do today?
I tell myself every single day that if I don't take care of myself, then I can't be the mom that my kids deserve. That is the first and foremost thing. Because if I don't think about that, then I forget. And it's like, okay, take care of everybody else, take care of everybody else. And then I start to slip mentally. So it's like, no, first we're getting ourselves straight, and then we can take on all the issues that may arise. But then it's also making sure that I make that time. I make it a habitual habit to take whether it be 5 minutes or an hour a day, to have time to myself, time to reflect on myself, time to reflect on the things that I need to work on. Because it's, to me, every single day I wake up, it's about being 1% better than I was the day before. That teeny bit of growth, I know over time stacks up, because it has been that tiny amount of growth stacking up over the past 2 years since having my daughter that has gotten me to where I am. Because when I think oh, long term, this huge old step, and I can't make it there, it's too far, it's like reverse engineer it. And what's the first step? Because the first step is always the hardest. The first step is always the biggest. So each morning I wake up and it's the first step is getting myself right. And once I get myself right, then I can get everything else right, because the biggest step is undertook and everything else is a breeze, because it's just tiny steps after that.
Do you find that there is a particular time of day where it's easiest for you to get that alone time? I imagine that there's probably a lot of parents, will kind of juggling kids, juggling home, juggling like after school activities. Is there something that's been very effective for you?
Every morning I wake up early, and it's not a like, oh, be up at 3 a.m. and kind of thing. I try to be up at least a half an hour before I feel like my kids would wake up, because my children are on a schedule, but with having a littler one, that's not always a guarantee. So I try to be up at least 30 minutes before I think that one of them will be up. So that way I can get myself a cup of coffee. I can sit and enjoy it. I do a daily devotional and just take the moment of sitting and snuggling with my coffee and taking the breather, because I know that just that having a moment of a breath before I start my day starts my entire day right. Because I don't want to start my day off on the wrong foot, because everybody, even if you're not trying to navigate through children and the crazy of life, when something goes wrong right in the morning, everybody's like, oh, well, the rest of the day is just going to be like that. And it's like, no, you can make the choice to change it. But if you make the initiative to try to start it as best as possible, then anything else that comes up throughout the day seems like a breeze, because you made that initiative, even if it's just 5 minutes to take a sip of coffee and just take a deep breath. You'd be surprised how impactful that can be to your day.
I love that. I know that you've come a long way so far. Is there anything in particular that is still something that's like a work in progress for you that you're focused on improving right now?
It's definitely still my mental health. And I think it will always be my mental health, because our brains work in a type of way of old habits die hard. So
Mhm.
when you're used to beating up on yourself and scrutinizing yourself and falling back on that, like, as a consistent, because forget what the rest of the world is saying, you are your toughest critic, and the thoughts that you think in your mind are the things that are most impactful. So as going through this mental health journey, I've come to realize that every single day, that is something that I have to work on, because old habits die hard. So when something doesn't go right, my brain wants to instantly switch back to, and I'm like, mm-mm, we're going to reel that right back in and we're going to take it a totally different direction. And I don't think that my brain will ever not do that, because it's the default. So as long as I continue to try to make it not be the default, hopefully one day it won't be the default, but it's still there. It's still an old habit. And I know I have to work on it every single day, because I don't want to be my worst critic. I don't want to sit here and criticize and scrutinize myself every single day when there's no need for it. It's called being a human and making mistakes, and shit happens, you know?
Yeah.
So I try
It,
to make sure that that's something that I'm always cognitive of, because I know that my brain will try and I have to be like, nope, not doing it.
There is this really good book I recommend called Positive Intelligence, and it essentially talks about these, I think there's 10 what they call saboteurs that are basically ways that we self-sabotage ourselves as adults when it comes to mental health. And the judge is like the number one that everyone shares. And the other nine, like you might have like a handful of them, and someone else might have a different handful of them. For me, for instance, two that I deal with in addition to the judge are hypervigilance, so like a lot of anxiety, and then also like hyper rational. I'm a very, very logical person. So for me, sometimes, even though I feel it, being able to like exemplify empathy in the way that other people traditionally do it is something that I struggle with just because I'm just a very logical black and white person. And so sometimes that can, sabotage myself. And so Positive Intelligence is a book that I highly recommend for anyone listening, whether you've had similar experiences to the ones that Leeann has had or myself or not. I think it's just a really great book for everyone to listen to or read. It's audio book and also like a hardback. Leeann, I actually have a question for you that I don't typically ask everyone, but I'm curious to know, and this one might be a hard one, but thinking back, if you could have a conversation with your 12-year-old self today, what would you tell her?
It's funny that you asked that because I just seen a meme about if you could say 3 to 5 words to a past self, what would it be? And I had to take a moment and pause and think about it because typically my brain would default to something stupid. And when I sat and I paused about it, I couldn't help but think, be grateful. And I'm like, it sounds so simple, but the reality of it is if I had the probability to go back and sit and talk to 12-year-old me, 12-year-old me, I hated life and I hated trying to figure out how to navigate life. But I've come to realize that regardless of how shitty life may get, things work the way that they're supposed to work for a reason. And when you're in the tough moments and things just seem impossible, it's always like, I can't do it no more. I don't want to do it anymore. Why should I want to? What's on the other side of this that could be so great or so amazing? And if I would have quit 12, I wouldn't be a mom of 4 kids. I wouldn't have an amazing husband. And I wouldn't have a life of any kind of purpose. So it would just simply be grateful because I spent so much of my life not being grateful for where I was at, what I was learning, and the fact that I made it through. That some days I want to kick my own self because it's like if I would have just took the moment and soaked it in when I could have, I would have looked at things totally differently. And I wouldn't have hated life.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Leanne. Also, like, just thank you so much for being willing to be vulnerable. Because I know that's a very tough question to be asked and to answer it. And I know that it was definitely an emotional one for you. So I thank you so, so much for
See,
sharing.
I'm grateful that you asked because, like I said, it's kind of ironic because normally my brain would have defaulted to the don't give up and you got it and you can make it through and don't worry, it'll all end up being okay, the typical cliche kind of things. But like I said, I literally just seen this meme, and when I paused and thought about it, most people, their brain defaults to the cliche kind of things too, and it's like, but if you stop for a moment and just think about right now in this moment, be grateful for where you are, even if it sucks so horribly bad. You are learning something, you are growing from it. And when you do make it through, you're going to be grateful that you had to go through it, because what is on the other side is going to have, the process of it is going to have changed you as a person. And a lot of people see it as, oh, it's changing me in a bad way. But do you realize that the bad experiences in life are what make you relatable to other people, which is what gives them hope?
Yes. Say it louder. I love it. That's, I don't know if you like saw my kind of like my mission for the show, but that's one thing that I really, really try to focus on is creating a space for conversations that are both meaningful and relatable, because that's like it's these adjacent experiences that we have as human beings, and it may not be 100% the same exact play by play that someone else has gone through, but just knowing that someone understands the emotions, understands what it was like to be there, and to hear about how they potentially were able to bounce back and the tenacity that they were able to build up along the way, it gives them the hope. It gives them, I feel seen, I feel heard. There's someone else there like me. And I thought that there wasn't. I thought no one else had ever felt the way I had or had ever gone through this experience. And now I know that there is someone else.
And the other thing that I love about your show is the fact that it's not like, oh, I'm trying to compare my horrible experience and make it worse than somebody else's horrible experience. It's exactly that. Like you said, it's relatable across multiple people, because there's just, even if it's the tiniest a bit relatable, it's like, I'm not trying to say I'm any better than you or my situation was any worse than yours. It's no, it's I want to share openly and be vulnerable about the fact that we all are humans and we all go through things, and it's okay to talk about it.
Absolutely. And I'm a big proponent of never ever comparing situations, because a simple way to put it is that when you think about the weather, for some people, 75 degrees feels absolutely amazing. And then if you're from, let's say, Alaska, and you're constantly in 20-degree weather, you come and you experience a 75-degree day, it feels hot as crap. And you're like,
Uh-huh.
I do not like this. So it's the same thing with lived experiences. People experience trauma in very different ways. Two people might, for instance, like experience sexual abuse, and they might come out feeling completely different ways about it. They might be able to heal in very different ways. Postpartum depression, same thing. Any type of a lived experience or trauma can have very different impacts. And I think that that's even more why it's important for people to talk about it, because you might have only heard one person, like you had only heard the stories about mothers like despising their children and, maybe even hurting them. But when you finally came across your friend Kat, you realized, oh, there's many different ways and experiences that you can have when it comes to postpartum. The last question I ask everyone, because the show is called Not Your Average Goat, and GOAT standing for greatest of all time, which I am a big football nerd, and so I did kind of steal it from that. But I think that, everyone I bring on here, their story is just so incredible and inspirational. And so I'd love to know from you if you have a person, or it can also be kind of like a thing in your life that you would consider to be your GOAT.
It's gonna sound cliche, but I say it because I know the minute I say it, it's gonna sound cliche, but God,
Yeah.
because through all of my journey, um, I found God, and I've come to realize that that is the biggest rock in my life, is being able to have an open relationship with God. And I mean, like, can you get any bigger than the creator of the earth and us beings? I don't think so. Granted, I know not everybody has the same religious view and standpoint, but I had a moment where God literally saved my life. And since then, I haven't been able to turn away. And I'm incredibly grateful for it, because realizing that having God and Jesus in my life and knowing that I can be a good person and go through struggles and still turn to God no matter what has been the hugest thing for me. Because, like I said, if it wasn't for, I wouldn't be here. And that's the epitome of everything to me going through this journey, is knowing that I can have that relationship and I don't have to be ashamed about it and I don't have to hide it, and it'll be there no matter what, as long as I make the effort to make that relationship happen. And knowing that that will never die has been something so amazing for me.
Thank you for sharing. I know that spiritual relationships can be very, very, very helpful and valuable for so many people. So I'm sure that there are others who feel just the way you do, Leeann. Do you take new clients like when it comes to coaching, either like in person or virtual? Is there anything you would like to kind of share for anyone who might be looking for a new coach?
If anybody's looking to change their health, like I said, this isn't just a number on the scale, period, mentally, emotionally, physically, they can contact me on Facebook. They can send me a friend request. They can message me, or they could email me, and we could set up a time to talk about what they're looking to make a shift in and how they're looking to improve their lives.
Awesome, cool. And I can make sure that I link to your Facebook, and I can also include your email address if it's helpful in the show notes so people can have access to it. But Leeann, thank you so much for sharing your Saturday morning with me. And I know you took this call from the truck,
Yeah.
which may not be the most comfortable place. So I really appreciate your time and so much for you sharing your story today. I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to hear it and hopefully are impacted and, feel a sense of hope.
And thank you so much for having me, because it's been a true honor. And I hope that this one person, if one person hears this and it makes a difference in their day, then that's more than enough for me.
Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by yours truly, with music by Sergey Quadrado and Anton Blazov. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact